the Committee of the Whole is a formal body empowered to take action on items before the board during the months of July and August, when the full board, as directed by the New York City Charter, does not meet. In this way, the Committee of the Whole differs from standing committees, which can only make recommendations to the full board. Any decision made by the Committee of the Whole can be enacted immediately and will be ratified retroactively by the full board at our September 14th monthly meeting. The matter before the full board today is whether the board wants to endorse a letter written by Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams to Mayor Bill de Blasio, which proposes to include community board input in the hiring of commanding officers of the coterminous precinct. This matter was originally raised by Community Board 14's Public Safety Committee meeting on June 17, 2020. By majority vote, excuse me, by majority vote at that meeting, the board decided to submit clarifying questions to Borough Hall, and we are pleased and thankful to Ryan Lynch, Chief of Staff of Borough Hall, who offered to discuss those questions directly with our board tonight. Thank you, Ryan, for joining us. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Sean, for coordinating the meeting, and thank everyone at CB14. I'm a CB14 resident for all the work that you all do, and for putting together this really thoughtful response to an idea that the borough president has put forward as a way to really increase community engagement in policing, and to provide additional oversight at the most local of policing levels. I wanted to just, before I jumped into that, I wanted to just piggyback on the census conversation. We were just alerted late last week that the state funding process has now been moving again. We were told that we were supposed to, we put together an application in February for funding, for outreach, and that was right before COVID hit, and then we haven't heard anything since. And we finally just got word that they're going to be moving forward with that. We have to finish our reapplication again by Friday. But hopefully we'll be able to get some additional resources into communities to help get that count up. And there's a couple pre-qualified groups in CB14 that may be eligible for additional resources. So we're hoping that gets sent down to us quickly, because as Joe mentioned, the timeline is incredibly short. The fact that the state is only giving us money now is really perplexing and troubling. And trying to do this count and get an accurate count in a pandemic has also been very challenging. So any assistance you can get in getting your neighbors to sign up. Phone banking, we have there's daily phone bankings that I can share information with if anybody wants to phone bank and call people to fill out the census. Just let me know and we can get you that information. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I have my two children here who are eating dinner sitting next to me because my wife is working tonight. So if they're yelling and screaming, that's on me. So apologies in advance. But real quick, so I want, again, thanks to the entire board and to Sean for reaching out and quite frankly, providing the most thoughtful feedback that we've gotten on this issue thus far. And we're really pleased with a lot of these questions, because I'm going to be completely frank with you up front. Like, we don't have the answers to them. I have answers to some of them, but what the intent of this idea and this letter to the mayor and to the commissioner was to create an opportunity or a concept that we can they're saying hello, where we can engage community more in police oversight. This idea sort of stems from this need to have more local engagement and oversight on policing matters, but it's really intended to be a beginning of a conversation that a lot of community boards are going to have with their precincts and with their. Are you okay? You're right. With their with the mayor and the commissioner. So I don't know how you wanted to, Sean. I don't know how you wanted to go through the questions, but I can just open it up with that frame and then sort of answer accordingly. But what we're looking to do right now primarily is to just engender support for this idea. And then even possibly, given the fact that you've outlined a lot of really important questions that need to be answered and that need to be laid out, potentially identify a pilot project for something like this. And in speaking with the borough president, it sounded like we would be open to sort of, pitching a proposal from the community board about how the formation of the panels is created, how the bylaws of the panel are created, and pitching that to the mayor and to the commissioner directly, obviously in concert with our office. The borough president has been in conversations with the mayor, and the mayor has expressed an interest in this idea. So it's a matter of formulating what it would look like on the local level. What the borough president included in his letter was a makeup, a formation of panels that would be representative of community boards and of precinct community councils. He in his thinking, which he's saying is open to discussion, our vision was to really ensure that the members of the community board's public safety committee and the precinct community council had oversight in the selection of the panels. What we had envisioned was that the commissioner would present 3 qualified candidates based on their existing processes of determining who's qualified to become a precinct commander. And then this committee, this panel would be able to interview candidates and provide, receive additional background information about the candidates and make a decision about who they wanted to represent their community, with the understanding that community boards, precinct community councils have the most local knowledge of what communities need and what types of policing they want in their communities, and identifying the candidate that best aligns with that vision. So that was the broad-based concept. In terms of the questions that you outlined are very, very much the details that we still need to work together to figure out. We don't want to be the borough president doesn't want to come in here and say, this is what it's going to look like. We want to have a conversation with community boards and community members about how we're going to create this sort of panel and bring that to the mayor and the commissioner to encourage them to participate in this process. And then, so that would be, whether that's in a full-fledged for every 59 community boards across the city, or it starts off as a pilot program in select community boards, or even just one community board to test it out. We wanted to put the concept out there and put this vision out there, and then solicit feedback from community and from residents. So that's the general gist of it. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can, but I'm really thankful again for the opportunity to speak about this tonight, and especially in my home community board, and get feedback about this proposal and see if we can get Community Board 14 support in advancing this in some way, whether that's as a partner, formal partner in a pilot program proposal, or simply as the letter, as Ed mentioned earlier today.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. We have several board members who have joined us, and let's just throw it to the board members now. If you we have a number of questions here. Would anyone like to advance any question that we've already included, or if you have any additional questions that you might like to ask Ryan at this time?
Steve had a question about whether we reached out to Commissioner Shea. We have sent Commissioner Shea the letter as well, but I'm not certain the borough president has spoken directly with the commissioner about it. I know he's spoken with the mayor about it directly.
Okay.
Ed, I'd like to say something if I can. It's Joe Dweck.
Absolutely.
And I think that the basic disconnect that we see is that any choice by anybody whose previous choices for commanders, as you well know, has been based on their history and from the police commissioner. And very frankly, here in the 7-0 precinct, as you might be aware, we've had only fantastic commanders. The concern that we have is people who are not familiar with police processes, police commanding, police management, and all of the various things that go into running a precinct are going to want to make decisions really based on popularity of the candidates. Frankly, at the last meeting, the kinds of input that people are interested about saying, the commander of the precinct has no effect on, whether it be a rogue cop is something that obviously, as you know, is hired by IAB or the FBI. The tenor of a particular precinct is not coming from him; it's coming from the commissioner. So many things don't come from the commanding officer, and therefore we don't understand how to make that decision. So people like Ed and I and Sean, who have been here a long time and have seen quite a bit, we have see a disconnect between that process.
So I would actually disagree that the precinct commanders actually don't set the tenor for what their precincts are. I know that the 7-5 precinct is now managed by Commanding Officer Craig Edelman, and that is a precinct that has had a lot of issues. In light of a lot of the protests, they also, the community had, previous to him being appointed, had reached out to the commissioner and said that we don't want this particular person as the precinct commander, in large part because of his known history. So I would slightly disagree with they don't have any control over the tenor or any rogue cops. They are where the buck stops in terms of where the precinct is precinct commander. If they have issues in their precinct, it's on them to address them and to refer them to the appropriate authorities of higher ups in the police department. So I think it's primarily we're not asking for feedback or thoughts on policing sort of as a whole, but more on the reviewing because that will be primarily decided by the recommendations that a commissioner provides, and then those that are those are identified as candidates would be sort of already qualified for the position, but then would be sort of interviewed based on what the community wants from the tenor, to use your word, the tenor of how they want to see policing happen in their community.
Okay, Ryan, this is Ed. What kind of tools would be provided to board members? Would we have access to information about, past performance and that kind of thing, as far as, and and any kind of problems that might have come up with the candidates? What kind of tools would be provided to us?
I think that's something that would still need to be worked out in terms of the breadth of background information. I don't have the authority to say what kind of tools would be provided, but I do know that as with the reforms to 50A, that information is going to be more transparent and more accessible to the public. But what I would hope to see and I think what the borough president would hope to see in this project would be for local communities to identify these panels would identify what they would need in sort of the formal formation of the panels. So it wouldn't just be like this is what is going to happen as a pro forma rubber stamp. This is what will be necessary at the local level to effectively interview potential candidates for precinct commanders.
Ed, it's Mark, the person named user has a hand up.
That's me, that's Alvin. Thank you, Mark.
Alvin?
Can you hear me?
I can, Alvin. How are you?
I'm fine, Ryan. Ryan, a couple of questions. One of which, in constructing this model, are you basing it to any extent on the C30 model used by the Department of Ed for its selection principles? Another question is, have you given any thought to the time constraints that would be practical for this process? Another question has to do with, I think we could expect that along with authority goes responsibility. And would we be endangering our ability as clients of the police department to hold police brass accountable for their decision? I'll start with those questions. Are they intelligible?
The third one was about safety with respect to safety among the police department and you. I'm sorry, I wasn't understanding the last one.
The third question had to do with accountability. That if the community is going to play a formal role in selecting the precinct commander, it's on its face, it appears to diminish the accountability of the police department command structure in case the wrong choice is made.
I see what you're saying. Okay. I don't think it would. I think that the accountability remains within the police department because they are going to be selected. The three candidates will be selected by the commissioner in the formal process. Excuse me, hold on a second. The accountability remains with the commissioner in identifying the qualified candidates. What this panel would primarily do would be reviewing what these qualified candidates already the qualifications that they have and whether which one he or she meets the needs of the community the most. Is that person reflective of the community? Is that person have a similar philosophy to policing that the community board or the policing community council has? With respect to the time constraints, it's all volunteer. So the time constraints would have to be understood as you're going into the process. And then again, I'm sorry, Alvin, the first question was?
Do you think I can remember the first question you're mistaken?
You said something based on a model of the Department of Education?
Oh, yes. To what extent is this self-consciously modeled on the C30 process? It's used for principal selection.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that, so I would have to look into that.
I want to express that I share some of the concerns that those backgrounds.
Glenn has his hand up. And Alvin, can you lower yours, please?
Yes, a couple of things. First, I'd like to start off by saying that I have tremendous respect for the police. Anyone who's willing to risk their lives to protect me and my family has my utmost respect. But any group that is 30,000 or so strong has a few bad apples. We're now in the time of Black Lives Matter. I'm old enough to remember these type of discussions 50 years ago, and nothing really has changed. And we're in a position again, right now, that it is possible that something could be done to deal with the very few bad actors that are in the police department. Even if it's well below norms, and only 1% of the police are bad actors. And what I mean by that is overly aggressive unnecessarily or racist in some sort of way. That's still over 300 people that shouldn't be on the streets. There is nothing that I know of proposed right now, certainly by the borough president, that would even begin to address that problem. Whereas that Clark has proposed some possible things that would actually make a difference. And I would like to see a proposal come out of Borough Hall that sounds like it might be able to hold some of these people accountable. And I also just my last thought, I agree with Joe Dweck. As much as I know about the police, which I think is more than most, I do not feel that I have the ability to intelligently choose should be a precinct commander. Thank you. I'm done.
Hi, this is Gail Smith. Can you hear me?
Hi, Gail.
Yes.
Hi. A quick question for you, Ryan. You had mentioned earlier, you alluded to a pilot program and a selection of community boards for what the borough president is anticipating to do. My question is, how does that look? What does that entail, and the training, et cetera?
So we haven't created a pilot program, or we've put out a concept or an idea, and we're seeking feedback on those ideas. So what the borough president put in his letter would be the formation of a panel that included representatives from the public safety committees of the relevant community boards and the police precinct community councils. We haven't just gotten to a point where we're discussing training or any of that that information yet. Like I said, we're looking for feedback on the proposal, and then identifying what I had mentioned about a pilot project was that, you know, the letter was signed by several, I can't remember the number, I think about 20 or so, the community boards and precinct community councils in Brooklyn. We're looking to, you know, push this to the mayor and say, let's work together to identify a format that works with input from local community boards. So the letters, the questions that were put together by CB14 were incredibly helpful for us to think about this, and will be incredibly helpful as we're speaking with the mayor about this. What I had mentioned about a pilot project is that if CB14 or another community board wanted to you know, propose this to be a pilot in their particular district, we would be willing to work with those groups to bring it to the mayor and to the commissioner, because obviously this would be a conversation with the administration as well to develop what the final product would look like.
Nicole has her hand up.
ahead, Nicole.
Thank you. I also had myself on mute. First of all, Mr. Lynch, thank you for being here, especially while you're also taking care of your kids. I feel you. I have a very small crying baby somewhere in the apartment. I'm really happy to see the letter. So I just want to thank you for that. And I do hope the board does endorse it. I know I believe we can give valuable input to this process without being experts on police work. And I'm really happy to hear you talking about instead of the borough president and the office of the borough president working out all the details of what that involvement would look like, you want to involve community boards in sort of crafting that and, co-creating what that might be. Mm-hmm. But that lack of clarity, for me, it's not, but for many of my fellow board members, I hope I'm not misrepresenting them, but I think that is actually a huge area of concern, is the lack of detail. If I heard you correctly when you first started speaking, I think you said that the borough president he hadn't discussed this with Commissioner Shea, but he had discussed it with the mayor. Did I hear you correctly when you said that?
Yeah, he's spoken with the mayor about this, but I'm not 100% certain whether he's spoken with Commissioner Shea or not, but I believe he has not. Okay,
because I would love if you could share a little bit more about those discussions with the mayor, because I think if I remember the last meeting correctly, some of the concern was, well, if the plan doesn't have any detail and they take the plan to the mayor's just going to reject it because the plan has no detail. And then it was just like a meaningless gesture. So could you talk a little bit more, maybe you can, about what those conversations have looked like and, the chances of the mayor really buying into this plan? And I would also say, just as a general piece of feedback, because so much of the concern is around this lack of clarity, and I really like what I'm hearing from you about a panel or inviting a selection of community board members in, that might be something really good to add to the letter. But in short, my question for you is, you said the borough president spoke to the mayor. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what those conversations have been like and how serious the mayor actually would be about something like this? Thank you.
So I can't speak extensively about what the conversation was. I wasn't in the room when the conversation happened. I do know that what the borough president reported back to me, he said that the mayor was interested in the idea and wanted to discuss it further. That's all I really know about at this point. I think any sort of I don't think that they would dismiss an idea. And in my work with the mayor's office, they don't generally just dismiss an idea if there's lack of clarity. They like to have that conversation and dig into it with us a little bit further. So they like ideas being brought to them, but they also like to be part of the conversation about how they shape that idea. So I'm not necessarily concerned that the lack of clarity would be a hindrance at this point. I think it's actually my personal experience with the mayor's office and his team is that if you come to them with a nugget of an idea or sort of like a genesis of an idea, they're much more willing to work with whoever brings that to them, because they will have some say in it as well. If that
Nicole, if you can lower your hand. Jonathan is next. If you would like to talk, please raise your hand. We're not looking at the chat to see who would like to speak, so please use the function to raise your hand. Jonathan?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Ryan. Thanks for taking the time tonight to talk with us.
Hi, Jonathan.
In general, I've been a part of the community board since I was 17 as a volunteer. So I have a long history here with Community Board 14 and community board involvement in the community. I believe it's a very important role that we have. And though it can be frustrating that it's advisory in so many facets, but it does provide that essential part of the process in all the major decisions that can affect people's lives in our community. It gives the community a space and a formal step in the process to be heard and to have those concerns weighed by the appropriate decision makers who do make that final decision. Personally, I find the role in participating in these panels to be something of a big shift for a community board, to make a personnel decision outside of our district manager and staff. And so I am sort of, I guess, just having been around long enough, I'm a little unsure about how that changes the dynamic of the community board to be involved in personnel decisions of another agency. Granted, this is a very important one. If we were to have a say in any agency at all, this would be a good one to have a say in. But I think a lot of my fellow board members have brought up some interesting points on both sides of it. I would say the ones that stuck out the most to me, probably what made me feel ready to second guess endorsing the letter outright, was the proposed veto power. So I know that community boards play a role in recommending capital and expense budget priorities on really important matters for the community, really important concerns for different agencies. We meet with them at borough level consultations. We have district service cabinet to talk about those things on monthly bases. So we play a role in a lot of this and prioritizing those matters that are of greater importance over others so we can make sure they get handled with the limited resources the city has. We know the Neighborhood Advisory Board will go ahead and do the same thing with the Community Development Block Grants. My concern here is that we've never had veto power over something. And where I'm concerned about that is we have a bunch of unpaid volunteer members who are joining these bodies who then may actually get to make a decision that excludes someone from the possibility of getting a job. And then I'm concerned about equal opportunity employment and about bias that a community may have against certain types of candidates for commanding officers, when that might actually be a really important way to change the dynamic of any concerns we may have inside of our precinct citywide. So I guess my question to you is, on this particular point, is there any way that the consideration of this proposal could move forward without granting this panel the ability to veto the consideration of a candidate, and instead simply place on it the ability to underrank someone based on certain objective, non-racial, gender, sexuality-based criteria, very strictly career and performance-based criteria, and say that qualitatively on those fronts, we prefer X, Y candidates over Z candidates as a way of accomplishing that. So the veto power was a concern for me. And is there room for discussing a non-veto power and focusing more on something that allows for an objective rubric to evaluate candidates without giving this panel the ability to outright deny someone without qualification, the job if the panel were to so choose to?
Absolutely. That's it. Yeah. Again, it's an idea that we're putting forward, and if the feedback is that community boards don't feel comfortable with the supermajority veto option, that's perfectly fine with the borough president and with myself as well. And if that's something that is a concern to Community Board 14, and you still wanted to do a letter, I would encourage you to incorporate that into the letter for sure.
If I just follow up on that point, because that would probably earn my endorsement for consideration of a plan further, is that just not being on the table. That would be my personal preference. Otherwise, the idea that the community board could play a more robust role in that conversation, and maybe perhaps in the future that might extrapolate to other agency heads, sanitation, for parks, for fire, and things like that, where the community board can have, that could really engender the relationship between service delivery and the community concerns. That would be a really interesting thing to allow to evolve, again, while respecting that advisory role, where we can't do harm, but we can really help out someone we think is the best candidate to be in charge of that aspect of city services in our community. And that I would be very much in favor of. So, thank you, Ryan, for
great. Thanks for raising that issue. Appreciate it.
Jonathan, if you could lower your hand. Carl, you're next. I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. Fellow community board members, good evening. Ryan, good evening too. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. My questions are brief. So number one, de Blasio's term ends December 31st, 2021. And so for all the conversation we're having right now, is it actually feasible for the conversation to happen to iron out the details? And if the mayor says yes, for this to be implemented by December 31st, 2021. And number two, if yes, would this apply citywide to all 59 community boards or just the boards in Brooklyn? Or would the idea be if the mayor says yes, every community board in Brooklyn implements it in their own way while adhering to certain protocols? Those are my questions.
Sure, good questions. Answering the first question, the mayor is the mayor until December 31st, 2021. So if he has the political will to push something through, then that's what he's going to want to do. With respect to whether this applies to all boards, I think in the borough president's vision, this would, yes, apply to all boards, but understanding that we like to take baby steps and build off of foundations into foundations to first floors, second floors, and third floors. We are open to this being a pilot program in even just one community board district if they wanted to pursue that. So I think we're open to all those ideas at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Carl, if you can lower your hand. Sean, you had your hand up, but it's down.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go after everybody just so that I can make sure that I'm kind of summarizing what I think I'm hearing as answers. So I'm going to keep my hand down unless nobody else puts one up.
As of right now, oh, wait, Nina has her hand up. Go ahead, Nina.
So I have just a couple things I want to address. One, I think given the fact that we're probably, we're like the second most diverse community and community board in the 5 boroughs, I think that Jonathan's concern about biases, prejudices is probably pretty far-fetched. I mean, that's just my own take on that. My concern is a little bit different, and my concern is that particularly given how much political unrest there is and how much kind of anger toward the police in general there is, I'm concerned about how the community board may be perceived by the general public if we should say have a horrible incident. There was an incident that took place in a neighboring precinct quite a number of years ago of some really blatant and horrendous brutality toward somebody who had been taken into custody. And so my concern is that should something of that occur or some other type of incident occur in our precinct, that members of not just our community but surrounding communities could perceive the board as having more responsibility than we actually have, and that could it potentially put us in harm's way as a result.
So I'm not hearing the question. I'm hearing the concern. I don't have an answer to like a hypothetical of would you be more responsible or what the community would perceive you to be. But I hear the concern. I certainly hear the concern. It's something, to think about as we move through this process.
I guess what I'm saying is I think that in terms of any communication, publicity, and so forth that goes out, and I'm sure that there will be, as we move forward, that it needs to be very, very clear that we don't run the precinct, basically, and that.
Oh yeah, of course.
That we simply, have an opportunity to interview and make recommendations. We're not ultimately the ones who make decisions or in any way control what goes on.
And I think the question, there was a question earlier about accountability, and I mentioned that the accountability is always going to remain in the precincts. I'm sorry, in the NYPD structure, because the NYPD as it stands, puts up precinct commanders for appointment. What this process would do would be to review already identified as qualified candidates and then, provide feedback on what the community thinks is necessary in a precinct commander for that particular community.
Anita, if you can lower your hand, I'm going to unmute the two calling users who are not identified by name, if they have any questions.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, Ryan, this is Michael Cedillo, community board member. I don't have a question so much. I will try to phrase it as a question if need be, but just wanted to reiterate my support since last time we heard this proposal, and thank your office for having some imagination here in terms of how the community board can provide a democratic process into police proceedings. I have been researching this more and more since last we spoke, especially, some context since last we spoke. 50A was a bill in the state level, which would allow us to have more insight into substantiated and unsubstantiated complaints against police officers who are in the process of becoming police captains, which I think is a key piece of information that we would otherwise not have had, to Joe's point earlier that he made a couple months ago as well, and tonight, that we don't have the expertise to be able to help select already identified folks. I think that we will have newly available information that can help us in making those decisions, and I think this is a pretty no-brainer for me to be able to support. And I thank you for your speediness in responding to the questions. And that's all. Thank you for unmuting me.
Thank you.
Steve has his hand up. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for answering my question earlier about Commissioner Shea. I guess I was curious if this idea has been run by, any city council members or other local elected officials, say assembly people or state senators, and if you've gotten any feedback, positive or negative, from any of those folks, and if so, what that feedback has been.
I have not spoken to any council members about it. My guess is the borough president has, but that's a good question. I'll bring it back to him and see what he has said. The general conversations he has with council members around a lot of the policing issues is people look to him as a former police officer for policing ideas, especially as a reformer during the stop and frisk era. Generally these are ideas that he bounces off with former members of police that were in the Guardians or of like mind in terms of reform-minded policing. But I don't know. I couldn't tell you 100% if he's spoken to another elected official about it other than the mayor at this point, but I can find out.
Ryan, can I say one more thing?
Who was that?
Black.
Go ahead, Joe.
I think that the process, the goal, the very, very, very laudable goal, necessary goal, is to try to involve the community more with the police. And that's where we have to get to. I don't know if this is the right way, frankly, and to speak to Michael's point about reviewing policemen's complaints. Very frankly, Mike, every single time a bad guy gets arrested, he automatically lodges a police brutality complaint. It's on every very, very good cop's record because that's how the system works. But just to say something to, let's say, our current commander, who is fantastic, is not the warm and fuzzy guy, let's say, that the previous commander was. But everybody loves him. I mean, the cops do, because he really lets them work how they need to work. And as I said before, I was concerned that it's going to become a popularity contest, and I don't want as somebody said before, somebody have a negative vote because he just maybe then come well off in an interview, but he's a terrific candidate. But the involvement in the community for the police is the key thing. And for that matter, obviously, we could also be involved in education better, and in hospitals better, and in all kinds of things better. But this is crucial, and we need to have a better way of involving the community with the cops. It's crucial. Thank you. Sorry.
Nicole?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry for speaking twice in one meeting. When Nina was speaking earlier, she referred to an assault, which I didn't know until very recently was actually Abner Louima in 1997, who was assaulted in the bathroom of the 70th precinct, which is our precinct. And I can imagine that maybe for some of the longer serving board members, and I'm using my imagination here, thinking back in time, how horrific it would have been to be involved in that, and having been involved in any of the decision making that led to any of the staff that were somehow implicated in that. And I can understand how heavily that would weigh, that kind of responsibility and accountability. And I think those words have been brought up multiple times. And so I really understand Joe Dweck, Jonathan, this concern, Mr. Lynch, that you're hearing around accountability and the community board's perception. And I really respect that concern. And I guess I just want to add my opinion, which is that it would be an honor to have that kind of responsibility and accountability. And yes, there is risk that you would participate in a hiring decision where something bad did happen. But I think that the community board could really, hopefully, in a different world, help hire some awesome person that created and led a precinct where something like what happened with Abner Louima would never happen. So I really respect the long-serving board members and the concern that they're voicing. And I'm a very new board member, so they have much more experience than me. But I really feel it would be an honor, regardless of the risk of accountability, responsibility, to potentially hire someone amazing. And I feel like we should be coming at this. The borough president is giving us a chance to help do that. And we're thinking of the worst case scenario instead of the best case scenario. So sorry, I feel like that's my addition.
Can I just jump in real quick? I think maybe I appreciate thank you, Nicole. I appreciate Joe's comments as well. I was a community board member over Community Board 7 for about 8 years. And there's a lot of responsibility, but there's also this weird dichotomy where there's not a lot of responsibility. So I know that there's conversations around both of those issues. But what I wanted to just reiterate or make clear, I think what the borough president is proposing is to use community board members that are already on the member, like being members of public safety committee or whomever the chair would decide to appoint to some other committee. This would not be a community board endeavor. And I know if I wasn't clear, this would just be people pulling from the community board, people pulling from the precinct community council to create a new panel that would just be populated by people from those committees. So it wouldn't be like the community board has to do this and will be looked at responsibly for hires. It would be this separate entity that would be created to provide this review process. So I wanted to just make sure that was clear, because I realized that I don't think I was very clear, because I keep hearing what I think I'm hearing is that the community board doesn't want to be responsible. Community board doesn't want to be responsible. This wouldn't actually be the community board. It would be a separate entity that is just populated by existing members of the community board, as well as existing members of another council.
Nicole, if you can lower your hand. Sean?
This is Gail.
So yeah, I will jump in now. And thanks for clarifying that Ryan, because that is something that, I mean, board members have also asked for my input as you've all considered this, because there's a recognition that boards make decisions, and then staff actually then has to operate with those decisions. So I think the thing that I heard,
the same working for the borough president too.
Yes. But the concern that I've heard a few times is something that I've actually articulated to a few of you, and you've called it accountability. Some of you, we also, I think I've defined it as objectivity, and whether or not we seem objective. But Ryan, if there's that sort of step away from it being a board decision where the board holds a public hearing, then the board comes to a decision that's ratified at a full board meeting, that might help that a little bit. But to have skin in the game with only one agency and not the others does, when I'm trying to imagine that going forward, does give me a little bit of disquiet. And because it had been raised a few times this evening, I did want to sort of reframe it around objectivity rather than accountability. But it's also from what you said, Ryan, and some of the questions, it's clear that we're not of one mind, except I think that everybody on the board, we unanimously appreciate being part of the conversation. And since this isn't a hard-boiled plan that we either accept or reject, it seems like we don't have to endorse a plan so much as offer to or request that we continue to be part of the conversation going forward. And you said that you received endorsements in one form or another from several of the boards. So I'm wondering if Borough Hall has a plan to, or a way of bringing all of the boards who've given this thought and consideration into a broader forum, so that various Brooklyn boards can continue this conversation all together in a single space with you. And I'll if I could just. Should I leave it there, or should I go ahead and summarize sort of our letter had different categories, and I feel like those categories have all been touched upon by you. Do you want that summary now, or should I pause?
Please summarize, Sean. That would be great.
As far as formation of panels, it sounds like Ryan said that this is to be determined in consultation with the other stakeholders, specifically NYPD, the mayor's office. And Ryan, you had mentioned to me before, I don't know if it came up tonight, but also the city law department would have to ensure that we were going about this. And I suspect there's also some union considerations that would have to also be taken into consideration. So formation of panels, TBD with other stakeholders. Role and operation of the panels is also to be determined in consultation with PD and other stakeholders. But you did kind of talk a little bit about it being an entity that draws from the board and community councils, but then has its own role as a panel that becomes somewhat separated from each individual board. Then the candidate pool, it sounds like it wouldn't be like everybody in the galaxy. It would be narrowed down by NYPD in terms of who the qualified candidates would be, and then there would be input onto that finite group of candidates. And in terms of implementation and timing, there's different ways of looking into how it would be implemented. A pilot program is one option, and clearly that would also have to do with the sort of political will that would come from the mayor's office, since it is, in essence, a citywide proposal. I think those were our main categories on the letter, and if I've got anything terribly wrong or you want to clarify any of those, please do.
I think you did a good job recapping. The one thing that I was really impressed with about one of the questions, else can communities be doing to further advocate for women and women of color to be promoted in roles of leadership? That is something that the borough president talks a lot about. And the way that he became a member of the police department was directly to be, improve the diversity of the police department. So if you have neighbors, if you have people that are looking for what a future would be to advocate for them to look into joining the police department, and if they have concerns about the police department, working to reform that from within. Because when you had that, it was just that, and my note was recruitment. So, and talking to people that may not have historically thought about the police department as a potential career.
Hey, why do people are headed to the beach right now?
Sorry, Vic, I think. User.
This is User. This is Alvin Parker.
Go ahead.
What I've heard so far is general agreement by the participants in this conversation that the community board is interested in pursuing this matter further, whether on a trial basis, on a pilot basis, but at least to continue participating in the process. That we're grateful for the opportunity to get into the process. I'd appreciate some confirmation of that from my colleagues on the board, that we are interested as a board in proceeding in some measure, moving forward with this.
Well, I'll start, Al. This is Ed, and I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. From what I've heard, it sounds exactly like the consensus. It would be to proceed, however cautiously. So I would like to hear from other board members on this. I think I heard Gail. Gail, was that you?
Yes, it was me, Edwin. Thank you. First of all, I, also concur with what, my fellow board members have said. And I think that there are still questions. We've actually asked additional questions in addition to what we had already forwarded to the borough president's office. So I too concur that we need to meet in a different setting with the other community boards that are also interested in this, so that we could really understand where we are going. And I guess my question to you is, given the time constraints, and September is right around the corner, what are the next steps for us?
Sean, is your hand still up, or you just didn't lower it?
What are the next steps?
Gail, who are you asking? Who is that question?
That was to Ryan. I'm sorry.
Oh.
It was to Ryan.
I'm sorry. I thought you were asking the board what the next steps were.
No. That was to you.
Oh, okay. So I like this idea of reconvening those that had signed on to further discuss the idea. I also want to bring this back to the borough president, the feedback that you all provided, and share with him the thoughts that you all had, and see if we can impress upon the mayor to potentially convene a more in-depth conversation about this. But I could certainly bring that back and report back. With respect to what the board does, I'll defer to what the board members want to do in terms of next steps in engagement, whether that's a letter or further kind of going further and like being willing to be a quote unquote guinea pig for this idea. It's really up to the board.
Just as a point of clarification, my questions were really directed to the borough president's office as far as next steps.
Okay, thank you, Gail. As far as the board's next steps, I think we'll need to review this, and when we meet in September, that we should continue this discussion among board members. So, of course, we'll need to meet again, undoubtedly virtually, and formulate what our next steps would be. Sean, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, just that I because this is a committee of the whole meeting, I guess the action that's being taken is maybe to substantiate that the board has agreed that there is interest, broadly speaking, in continuing the dialogue with Borough Hall and the relevant stakeholders. And so whether the board wants to put that in a letter to Ryan, to Borough Hall, that actually is the thing that makes most sense right now. But if the board decides you want to do it some other way, I do think that there is something, an action item that should come out of this committee, and it, whether it's just acknowledgement to move forward, I think that would suffice. That would then have to be ratified at the full board meeting in September, and then the board has to decide that if it then gets punted back to the Public Safety Committee meeting where the issue originated in terms of taking the, taking the wheel and moving the conversation forward.
Jonathan has his hand up.
Mr. Chair, I think in light of all this, and we've had this wonderful conversation, we really appreciate Ryan joining us and the Borough President's Office for both coming up with it and then really asking us to engage in this as a very serious proposal. So I think maybe because that might be essential to get the ball rolling so that by September, maybe more can happen than if we wait till September to say or do anything further. So I'd like to move that we endorse the concept and submit a letter in line with what the borough president has been asking us to sign, but say that we're maybe without wholesale endorsing the exact wording, but something to the effect of we want to continue the conversation about a greater role in community, board, and community organization involvement, community stakeholder involvement, something to that effect. And that we'd like to continue the conversation with fellow community boards to help guide a process that we can all be proud of as active community residents in helping to shape the future of community law enforcement and policing. Maybe we could sort of agree as a committee of the whole on a letter of something of that nature, and that way we could say we are endorsing continuing that conversation and endorsing that much of the idea and seeing where we could go from there. So that's the motion, is that we vote on approving a letter endorsing the idea and continuing that conversation to flesh out.
Okay.
Ed, before you go, Joel first, and then Nicole have their hands up.
Okay, we actually have a motion on the floor.
Okay.
I second.
I just have a question about the motion.
Okay, I was going to ask for discussion now.
Okay. So Alvin, at my very first meeting, told me I really needed to review Robert's Rules of Order, and I didn't, Alvin, so I'm sorry. I will, but I'm never totally clear on what the rules of order are. But this meeting, at our last meeting, I thought what we were considering was, are we going to sign or not sign the letter as it is from the borough president? And then there was the motion to have this additional meeting, and now Jonathan has presented a motion to sign a letter, but it's a different letter. But that kind of means that we never voted on, like, very clearly yes or no, does this committee of the whole want to sign or not sign the letter from the borough president as it is right now. So I feel like we're skipping to signing a new letter without saying categorically, no, we refuse to sign the original letter. Does that make sense?
Can we defer to Ryan on that, though? Ryan, is that, I mean, it is just a continuation of the conversation. Does that sound problematic?
Not at all to me.
And will we be getting the answers to our other questions, Ryan?
The answers that you sent over?
Yes, because I know that there were many you weren't able to
Well, I think those answers are. I'm not going to have the answers. They're going to be answered as the process continues, right? So
right. Okay. So
yeah. So
okay.
Joel has his hand up.
Yes. First of all, so happy to see everybody, and hopefully we'll be able to get together in person in the not far distant future. This whole thing is very interesting and difficult because what we're about is community involvement, and here the borough president saying, "Here, have community involvement," and we're going, "Well, maybe, I don't know." So it's interesting, but my overall feeling is just Ed asked, what does everybody think? I think we need to be part of it if it's it's moving forward, and we need to be part of it. I kind of agree a little bit, a significant amount with what Glenn and Joe said long ago in this conversation, is that who am I to be deciding who this commander is? I'm not a police person, although, I've been neighborhood president for over 10 years, and I know the commanders, and they've all been, good as far as I'm concerned. But we need to be part of this. One thing that occurred to me is that I could readily see these committee meetings. And by the way, how much input are we going to have if it's 3 people who've already been, pared down to 3 people? But putting that aside, I could readily see these meetings, if they're public, these meetings, and we're interviewing prospective commanders, becoming very politicized and unpleasant. So just want to put that out there. Anyway.
Thank you, Joel.
Steve?
I don't want to unnecessarily extend things, but there was a lot in what Jonathan said. So I was wondering if that could be either repeated or some version of it be put in the chat box, just so I have a clear idea of what exactly the motion is. That's it.
John, I'll happily draft something in the next 30 seconds and post it in the chat for everyone to look at, if that helps, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely, sure. Does that work for you, Steve?
I think everybody who has their hand up has spoken, so if you could all lower your hand if you have. Glenn just raised his.
Yeah, it's just that a point of order was brought up, and that is that this whole meeting was predicated on the idea of us deciding whether we wanted to agree with the original borough president's letter and sign on with it or not. And instead of taking that vote in our last meeting, we decided to gather more information, which is what we've been doing. So it seems to me that that issue predates the current motion, which is about changing the nature of the language. So I'm concerned that we're putting this out of order and that we shouldn't be voting on this one until we've decided on the first one.
Brian, I fully understand what you're saying. However, I think we need to, and I think, maybe we should, kind of postpone moving on John's motion right now until we have gotten that consensus on, whether we have enough information to sign or not sign this letter that currently exists. So I'd like to hear from board members on that, and then we can move on or not move on to John's motion. In other words, do you feel that you have enough information at this point to decide whether we should sign or not sign the borough president's letter, sign on to that or endorse it, his letter to the mayor?
Ryan has offered us clear guidance in that regard. He has told us that the process is a moving target, and we're not being asked to sign off on the original letter. That borough president's office has broaden their view of the process. I think Nicole's objection, while thoughtful, it has been answered by Ryan. That we don't have to respond to the original letter. We can act on Jonathan's motion. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Alvin. I think I missed that when my phone kind of went out there briefly. Okay. So then I think we should move on with voting on Jonathan's letter. It has been, moved to endorse the letter in concept, and that has been seconded. Is there any further discussion before we vote on that?
I'm not sure if Glenn never lowered his hand or if he still has it up. It's down. And Jonathan?
Yeah, hi. Mr. Chair, I just want to read it out so that everyone could hear it clearly, what the motion is. I did post it in the chat, but for those of you who may not be able to read it. So I move that the board authorize the chair to submit a letter to the borough president and the mayor endorsing the general concept of involving community stakeholders in a review of candidates being considered for appointment to police precinct commanding officer positions, and to continue the conversation with interested community boards and stakeholders in shaping that process to a fully detailed proposal.
Okay, so, I would assume and hope that that we all understand that now, and just for the sake of order, proper order, let me hear that second again.
Seconded, Joe Dweck.
Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
I'm going to unmute the phone, people who are on the phone.
I'm in favor. This is Michael Cedillo. Thank you.
Okay. Just, verbally state if you're in favor.
I'm in favor.
What was your name?
Nina Savgir.
Okay, thank you, Nina.
Alvin Burke in favor.
Thank you, Alvin.
Florencia.
Joanne Brown in favor.
Florencia Chang Ajita in favor.
Greg Alvarez in favor.
Glenn Wall in favor.
Joe Dweck in favor.
Gail Smith, favor.
Joel Siegel, favor.
Okay, Ed Powell in favor. All those opposed, please state that you're opposed and with your name.
I oppose Steve Cohen.
Okay. Is there anyone wishing to abstain?
I'll abstain, Dwayne Joseph.
Okay. Right. Is there anyone who wishes to declare himself or herself, unable to vote on this because of conflict of interest?
This is Billy. Apologies. I will vote in favor of the resolution. I raised my hand on the chat, but I'm not sure if that accomplished the communication that was necessary.
Thank you, Billy.
Ed, same thing for me, Jonathan Judge. I'm in favor.
Thank you, John.
And
Okay, then the
just for record keeping, Ed, if I could jump in, because it was a little bit haphazard in terms of getting voice and some hands and some screenshots. If I think that what our records will indicate is that all members of the board in this meeting were in favor of this motion, other than Steve Cullen and Dwayne Joseph. Steve opposed, Dwayne abstained. If there's anybody else who's not in favor, please unmute yourself and indicate that now, or shoot me an email so that we get the record straight. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. And then, if there's nothing further.
Oh, wait, there's one more further thing. Jonathan,
okay.
if you could please, I don't know if I can capture the language in the chat. If you've written it out and you can shoot me an email so that I can just do a verbatim on the letter, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, then, Mark, thank you for doing your usual great job.
Thank you, Ed.
Ryan, thank you for providing some enlightenment on this issue.
Thank you.
And please thank the borough president for making this conversation possible. And thank you to board members for your very lively and insightful discussion and input. That's why you make the big bucks. Okay, well, once again, thank you all. Please be safe. We'll speak again in September, if not before. Thank you. Be safe. Have a good evening.
Appreciate you.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Like it's summer now.
Bye.
Bye.